Hey, glad you're here. My name's Dusty. I'm one of the pastors, and I'm really glad you're here. We're taking a little bit of a break from Revelation over these 2 spring break Sundays, which, by the way, I have noticed in adulthood that spring break is noticeably less awesome in adulthood than it is as a kid. That vacation week still counts if you take it, just like it would any other week. So the kids, I know you're feeling it. So anyhow, I am really glad you're here. So we're taking a little bit of a break. We're going to, finish up with Revelation, through the rest of the spring, but these 2 spring break Sundays doing a little something different. So Psalm 46 is where we are today. And what I want to do is just jump right into reread. We'll go a verse at a time or verse or 2 at a time and work our way through this. We tend to work through books of the Bible here. And so here we're just going to take this one psalm, this one chapter in the Old Testament. So here you go. Verse 1. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. All right, so this is going to get repeated 3 different times here in verse 1, verse 7, and the psalm will conclude with basically the same layout here. And so you have, on the one hand, God being refuge and strength and help, and a very present help, and then you've got trouble. Those are the 2 sides of these things, God's presence and then trouble. And I don't think that I've got to over-explain trouble to you. I shouldn't have to. That it might look differently for different people. Like you might have a middle school in here that has a bunch of kids that are being mean to them and are letting them hear about it and whatever. Just people and kids that can be mean. And then on the other hand, there are those of you in the adult world right now are really feeling it. And you may have some marriages that are in tough shape. There may be some relational conflict that is really troubling to you. You may have some trouble at work where you're trying to figure out a way forward, and there may be some instability even above you in the company you work for, or you may own a company and you may have a lot of instability underneath you or with competitors, and you may really feel the strain. You may have some investments going poorly. I don't think I need just to go on and on and on about examples of this, do I? That trouble, all right, here's the question for you is, what is it even on the drive here today, or maybe even while we were singing, that you had a hard time even concentrating on the words because your mind kept drifting to think about this thing? What is that for you? I want you to think for a second. This is going to be a little bit more of a lecture and a lab. Sometimes the sermons are more lecture, and then like the lab is, hey, go think about this during the week kind of thing and go put it into practice. Today, there's going to be some lecture and lab built into this. But the reason is that throughout this psalm, the word Selah is present. You may have noticed that whenever Jason was reading it. And what that means is like stop, reflect, consider. And so I might actually, even though it didn't give us that prompt, I'm going to give us our first exercise. I'm just going to give you a few seconds of awkward silence to think about, for you right now, what is the trouble right now that God would be potentially present with you in, that he would be a refuge and a strength in the middle of. I'm going to give you a second to reflect, just silently, what is hard for you right now? Consider. All right, my guess is you didn't have to do a lot of deep thinking on this one. There's sometimes you may have to really anchor, you may have to have more thought on some of the ways that God's going to enter into trouble as we go on to this passage today. But my guess is that it didn't take you long to not only think of one thing, maybe the main thing, that the point of anxiety, fear, frustration, but then it probably quickly started going, and I'll tell you another thing, while we're at it, that if I gave you more time, you might have had a short list of trouble. So, all right, so you have, on the one hand, God's got this, he's refuge and strength, present help, and then you have trouble on the other side. Let's move into the second verse, and how I want us to think about this is to think about today like we're in the Louvre or something like that in Paris and going through a museum and, stopping and looking at paintings. And the psalmist is painting a portrait almost, and of different metaphor, different images, and we're going to kind of move from portrait to consider this basic dynamic of trouble, but then God's help and presence in the middle of it. So verse 2 is going to be portrait number 1. Therefore, and that would be pulling back to the first verse of God being our refuge and strength and a present help in the middle of trouble. Because that's true, we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. Selah. All right, so We will not fear even though the earth gives way. So the portrait in my mind, whenever I imagine this first portrait at the Louvre that we're looking at and thinking about how God works in the middle of trouble, is I'm thinking like something like Northern California, maybe the Oregon coast, something like that. If you've ever seen pictures of that, maybe especially during heavy rains, where you've got the sea that's like breaker after breaker after breaker coming in on rocks down there. Like you probably wouldn't want to go. It looks like initially it'd be really cool to surf, but then, or to boogie board or whatever your flavor would be. But you see it like crashing on rocks. And so like there's all sorts of turbulence down there. And you see the sea, the waters roar and they foam. But then the image in my mind in this painting is you've got these like sheer embankments on the side of it, and there's heavy rains, and then because of the breakers rolling in and because of the rains, you see just a slide where it feels like the mountains are just falling into the sea, and then you've got the sea roaring and foaming and the breakers rolling in one after another, and like this would be the image of this. And so I don't know if you've ever felt like you are this imagery here of a world that's turned upside down. Have you ever felt like your world was just crashing down around you? Have you ever felt like that? Like that's picture number one. And some of you may feel like that like right now, and I'm really glad you're here. I would just say this is like acute medical emergency almost, like you're at the ER and we're just trying to clamp an artery right now. And I don't know, I mean, some of you I would know what's going on, but I wouldn't know that for everyone. But like there'd be a certain number of people here every single week where like legitimately, like step one is to clamp the artery because your world is crashing down around you. So most of you, there's trouble, but maybe not quite that acute. It might be chronic, like a long-term problem that you're having. But there have been times where truly, like you were just like, man, I don't know how we get through this one. Like I am so sad. I am so afraid. I am so angry, where you would feel this. All right, so I bet you have been there before where there's major problems that you're feeling. So there's that first portrait where the side of the cliff is falling into the sea with water that is just churning, huge breakers coming over the rocks, and like you just feel like that is your life right there. Now, that isn't necessarily encouraging, but think about what this verse is saying and why it would say Selah at the end of it is we're not going to fear in the middle of that, in the middle of looking at this portrait, however real it is, whether that's something we feel right now or something that we have felt in the past, something that you'll certainly feel in the future. Sorry to break that to you, but that is even a real thing that will happen. I'm reading a really interesting book that I need to let marinate more. But Tim Keller, who's with the Lord now, wrote a book on pain and suffering, and he's just talking about how we are uniquely set up to have a very hard time with suffering in the West, like specifically in America, that we value so much like pleasure and life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, and we are just completely dismayed when suffering and trouble comes our way. We can tend to get really salty at God in the middle of it in a really unique way, and because of medical advances and relative prosperity, we're not confronted with suffering like a lot of our ancestors have if you were to go back a few hundred years. And so a lot of us, we can completely get tipped over when the mountain is crashing into the sea. We really can, and get really upset with God in the middle of it. But here what this passage is saying is, hey, we're not going to fear though the earth gives way. Even we're standing on the top of that cliff and we feel it kind of shaking underneath our feet, and we're wondering if we're next, like that slab next to us just caved into the sea, and we're wondering if the ground underneath our feet is about to go. But we will not fear. And the reason is it goes back to verse 1, in that he is our very present help. He's our refuge and our strength in the middle of trouble. Therefore, because that's true, because we're comforted by God, his promises of the cross and the resurrection, because of the nearness of the Holy Spirit, because of his presence and nearness and comforting, we aren't going to be afraid, even though the rain is coming, the sea is crashing down, and everything else. The trouble is real, but God is with us and he's here to help. So we're going to, because this verse said Selah, that's that's what we're going to do from here on out. Again, we're going to take an awkward break in the middle of a monologue sermon thing, and I want you to consider your trouble. You already know what that is, but I want you to also consider alongside of your trouble, for whatever it is you're experiencing right now, no matter if that's moderate or severe, God being refuge and strength and a very present help for you in the middle of it that would cause you to not be afraid. Stop and consider that truth. Reflect on it. All right, let's keep moving into verse 4. Y'all enjoying these Selahs? Y'all like the awkward silence? It's okay, we'll get through it, man. It's going to be good. That's why those things are there. All right, portrait number 2 is in verses 4 and 5. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God. That means the people of God is what that would be referring to. The holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. God will help her when morning dawns. So, the first picture we saw, Northern California, maybe Ireland, big cliff, seas roaring, some of that's caving into the sea. We move to our next portrait in the Louvre, and now it is a totally different portrait. On this one, in contrast to this one with the roaring seas and someone wondering if they're next and about to slide into the ocean, that they probably wouldn't survive. Now you've got, just get whatever in your mind is the most idyllic mountain stream you know. Do you have one of those? Depending on what you've been to, you're like, yeah, Ruidoso. Like, okay, if that's where you've been, that's fine. If that's what's in your head, then Ruidoso will do. I'm not saying it doesn't do, but it may be a spot in Colorado. I don't know what that would be for you, but the kind of thing where, like what's in my head on the second portrait is this grassy bank next to this stream, rising trout, of course, and but you have a little blanket, a pillow, a book, and you lay down next to it, and you can hear just the gentleness of the current and the river going over the rocks, and you just hear it, and you sigh like that, like it's just peaceful. You feel that? You got that image in your mind? That's what's being painted here by the psalmist. And so there's river, in contrast to this ocean that's just boiling. You have this river that makes glad the people of God. Like this would be talking about Jerusalem and the holy habitation. That'd be the temple in the Old Testament. But this would clearly be referring how we would understand this in the New Testament as God's people, that God is drawing near, and in the middle of the storms, that what he is that gentle river, and that you're in the meadow and you're lying down and you got that pillow underneath your head and it is flowing through, and he's calming you in the middle of all the turbulence, that God is in the midst of what we're going through, and you may feel like you're going to cave in and all will be lost and you're going to fall into the ocean, but it's saying here that God is in the midst of her, in the middle of his people, and he's calming, he is reminding, he is present. And listen to this, she, that's talking about you, God's people, she shall not be moved, And you're like, I don't know, man, the earth is giving way. I feel like I'm being moved right now. But in this portrait right here, that it's showing us that God is present, he's sustaining us, he's calming us, he's reminding. And even the word Selah, I've even heard rendered like relax, like just stop, breathe, consider, which we'll see again in verse 10 as an interesting reflection of that reality. All right, verse 6, let's move to the third portrait. We've seen the boiling seas, the cliff, caving into the ocean, and then now we've seen the most beautiful mountain stream, calming, restoring, anchoring, soothing, that we stand by God's presence. This actually reminds me a lot of what we've been doing in Revelation. Our portrait 3, verse 6. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice, the earth melts. Again, this reminds me so much of Revelation that, the nations rage. And we can look at this on a geopolitical level right now. Like I'm kind of a geek for history and war and all kinds of things. I'll just admit it. And I don't even feel bad about that. But like I have this one blogger I follow on Substack, that a really interesting Australian guy, and he was this long article I actually read this morning where he was talking about 3 theaters right now of conflict, of Taiwan, some concerning things going on there with Taiwan and China, and then obviously Iran, and then the Ukraine. And you've got three really delicate situations in geopolitics, and the nations rage truly that there's conflict and war, and it just feels like a tinderbox right now, doesn't it? And that's even in our current moment. But the reality is there's been ebb and flow to the intensity of that, but it's always with us at some level worldwide. The nations really do rage, and there's constantly conflict as everyone is trying to assert their own interest, and kingdoms totter. You could feel like that. Like, Iran is like barely like holding on to the regime they've had for a few decades, and you could just sense this. So the Ukraine's holding on and trying to survive in the middle of it. And so you've got geopolitical conflict, but that part may resonate less with you. I don't know on how much you care about that. You're like, yeah, dude, you totally are a total dork about that. And that doesn't really, I'm not really thinking about that much. But here's the stuff that I often do think about is I bet that for a lot of you, and a second ago, whenever I said name the trouble in your life, I bet for a lot of you it was some relational conflict, someone that has really hurt you, or someone that has really hurt someone that you love, someone that you're angry with, a relationship that isn't what it used to be. In fact, it may not even be going at all right now. And some hurt that has been there, something like that, that where there's an estrangement relationally, either between you or between someone and someone else you care about. And I even think about the church that it's actually really amazing. I think about this a lot, that it's really incredible that the kingdom of God advances through the church. It is actually really shocking when you think about it, because like you can be a student of world history, church history, which I've already kind of outed myself that I am too much maybe, or just observe what's around you now. And it's actually incredible that this whole thing moves forward at all. I mean, really, like that usually whenever there's a conflict between people, it becomes intractable. Like to get someone out of their perspective feels almost impossible with whatever that is. And we can make a complete disaster of it in the church and on and on. I've just seen it all. I've experienced it. And honestly, I've sometimes caused it. And so have you, with conflicts and all of that. And it is just like, God, how in the world do you keep seeking and saving the lost? How do you keep growing people when we make such a mess of it? The nations rage, and it's us too. There is conflict in the world and problems in the world. But the encouraging part in the middle of that, again, you've got this portrait here of, the nations taking up arms, or maybe somebody with a red button with their finger on it. I don't know what that portrait is. You can kind of this will be a do-it-yourself portrait number 3 in the Louvre that we're looking at. But that isn't encouraging, but what is he utters his voice and the earth melts. And that's very revelation-y. We're going to be seeing that in the next couple of Sundays, that this whole thing that opposes God is in a moment with his mouth, whenever he speaks the word, is coming to an end, and a new heavens and new earth are going to get rebuilt. There is trouble and a raging of the nations and conflict, but we can reset our focus on God in the middle of it. He speaks and the earth melts. He's got this. He has the final word. Verse 7, portrait 4. We just step one more over. The Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress, Selah. So you can already anticipate we're going to have an awkward moment here in a second. All right, so here the encouragement is exactly where this whole thing started in verse 1. Is we've got trouble, the water's boiling, we've got conflict, the nations rage. We feel it personally, we see it geopolitically, we see all of these things, but that he is with us, he is present, and you're not alone. That is probably one of the most powerful realities, is that you're not alone. It's a default for me, is feeling alone. I remember a few years ago, I sometimes talk about some of these experiences when I preach, but I went through a program with 5 other pastors, which interestingly, 3 of them are no longer senior pastors right now since we started this program in 2020. Legitimately, the first meeting was February of 2020, which is crazy. But one of these was one of the strangest but most powerful. Is this dude came to work with us that's a counselor, but really unorthodox techniques, you could say. And sometimes you'd be like moving around, and I won't even try to break down exactly what he was doing to me, but like all the guys I didn't even know I was going, but it turns out I was definitely going. And the dudes are kind of like standing up around, and I would move to these different quadrants explaining a problem I was going through, like a leadership challenge I was facing in the church. And I'd already had shared my life story, like my family of origin and stuff like that. And anyways, at this one point, we're talking about this conflict and problem I was having in the church, and I said, yeah, and I called and asked for help with this problem, and the person told me to figure it out, and that's what I needed to do. A friend that I'd called to ask for advice on what to do, and I said that's when I knew I had to fix this one on my own. The cavalry wasn't coming, that I was alone in this. And the dude looks at me and he said, "Wow, that sounds a lot like your childhood." And I was like, hang on a second, man, that's not like cool to do right now. We're talking about like leadership problems and stuff like that. But I think for me, what it showed was that is some of you may not struggle with that. Some of you may immediately go to people. You may immediately go to God whenever you feel pressed and squeezed. I think one of the things I really learned through that process is when, again, portrait one, the sea boiling, cliffs falling into the ocean, or portrait 3 of, the nations raging, kingdoms totter, you just feeling the conflict and all of this. When those things happen, when bullets are flying in the air, my basic thing that I can tend to do is withdraw into myself and be like, I don't know what's going on and who I can even trust, but I'm just going to kind of fix it on my own. I'm going to kind of withdraw into something that feels safe to me. And it's a strategy. It's a strategy, and a strategy that can kind of work-ish until it doesn't, right? But one of the problems that doesn't work about this strategy is that it keeps God at arm's length, because what he's trying to do, what this whole psalm is reminding us to do, is that he is with us and he's actually our fortress. If you want to think about, maybe we can talk about this image would be portrait 4 here. It looks a lot like portrait 1 with the breakers coming into the ocean and the cliff there. But on this one, you've got a fortress that's set on the side of that cliff that is not caving into the ocean, and the hurricane force winds are not moving it in the slightest. And in fact, if there were to be an army that were to besiege it, good luck, because they're not going to be able to penetrate the walls and all of that. That whenever we keep people and God at arm's length, that the help that would come to us and the restoration and the presence we miss. And so this is what this passage is saying here, is that he is that fortress and he is with us in the middle of all of the problems that you could be facing, and you are not on your own to solve it. Selah. So let's stop and consider your trouble, but also God's help. Even just tell him, Lord, I may not experience it like this. I may feel like I'm on my own, but just in your heart, why don't you just admit to him that this is true? State what's true and see if your emotions and how you experience it might follow. So silently, why don't you do that? Just admit that verse 7 is true, if you can say that in honesty. Okay, verse 8. Some of you are like, man, are we done with the Selahs? And the answer is there's only one left. It'll be at the end, don't worry. All right, come, behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolations on the earth. He makes the wars cease to the ends of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. So if you wanted to move to the last painting in the Louvre, I may have a couple of little side exhibits here in just a second in verse 10, but if we move to the last one, that you've got a bow that's been broken in half. I'm imagining like God snapping a bow across his knee, and chariots that have been burned, that the war, the mobile infantry of its day is now gone. And so he's saying, look, let's just look at the word of the works of the Lord, and his judgment is coming on the earth, and he's going to fix it, and he's going to stop what's broken. And again, this feels very revelation-y to me, and that he's going to come right, like we're talking Babylon. That's where we stopped last week. It's the values of the world that are opposed to Christ, and we're going to see that again, that Babylon's going down. That's what the next chapter we're going to handle 2 Sundays from now, and that all the brokenness of the world, God does not have a blind eye to it all, And sometimes it can feel hopeless of, Lord, are you not seeing this? Do you not see what they've done? Do you not see the evil? Do you not care? Do you not notice the abuse? Do you not notice the pain and the loss? Do you not care about this? And the answer is, I've noticed all of it, is what the Lord says. And he will bring desolations on the earth, and he's going to snap that bow across his knee, and war will come to an end. Evil will come to an end. Abuse will come to an end. Conflict will come to an end. Sin will come to an end. It will all be eliminated. Come behold the works of the Lord. This is what he said he will do when it's all said and done. All right, now, this is the main attraction, verse 10. And we're going to spend just a few minutes on this next to last verse. Verse 10, be still and know that I am God. I will be exalted among the nations. I will be exalted in the earth. So this is an incredible verse. This would be one of these that you should know and run with. It's so beautiful. And so I'm going to look at, there's 4 components of this verse I want to look at just for a few moments. So the first one, be still. And this is a command. This is not optional. To be still, and this is super hard in an ADD world that we don't know how to, if we're waiting on an appointment, we're flipping through our phone, and you know what I mean? Like it's like legitimately using the bathroom is reels and whatever. I mean, it's on and on. Like we have a very hard time just being still and acknowledging. But here in the light of God being help in the midst of trouble, that's the 2 sides that we've seen so far. It's be still. And again, relax is a way that you could render this. It would have a lot of the same force of Selah, of like if you are a breathing technique person, you could combine that in a very Christianly way and breathe deeply and know that he is God. That's going to be the second part of this. You can be still and know that he is here in the middle of whatever is the sea that's churning, whatever the conflict is, the nation's raging. I've heard it said before that worry can be praying to yourself, and prayer is stopping, being still, and turning and taking those worries to God. That's the difference between anxiety and worry and prayer. And legitimately, there's going to be a major barrier to this if we can't turn off the Xbox, put down the phone, press pause on the Netflix, whatever it is, stop, be still. Is going to be step 1, that God is present, but you may not experience that if we don't stop. In fact, let me just take the might off. We're not going to experience that. So the second part of this is going to be know God. We really should be handling these together, but I just wanted to break those components down. Let's be still and know God. That's what we're going to do. There's an emotion to the be still, that it's not just emptying our mind. This is what's the biggest difference between Christian meditation and Eastern meditation is you're not emptying your mind, but you're filling it full with God's presence and who he is and his promises. The know God part is really important because there's a difference between knowing doctrines about God. I know that God is sovereign. I know that he is powerful. I know that he is love. We need to know the doctrines, but there's a difference between that and then experiencing God in those ways. And again, because we're kind of talking images, that this little side exhibit I'm just going to take you in. I thought, what's the difference between, like, let's say, knowing the doctrine of redemption and experiencing it? So here's a picture that I ran across a few years back. These are POWs from Vietnam coming home. Isn't that something? They've been redeemed. They thought they weren't going to survive the war. Terrible conditions in the Hanoi Hilton and other places like it. And this is them coming home. I mean, this would look like a Redeemer worship service, except more on fire than ever. I mean, this is a celebration of redemption right here. These guys could know that you could be taken home. That's an idea. They are experiencing it. All right, do you see the difference? How about this one here? Hurricane Harvey. I ran across this image of someone that's working that was rescuing people that were taken by the floods in the Houston area. And here you have a mom and a baby. They could know the idea that there are people out there that rescue individuals. That's a fact. It's true. Sometimes people rescue people. It's another thing to feel the safety. Do you see that? the safety and security of being carried while you're holding on to your baby, being saved and rescued and taken away from danger to a place of safety, experiencing the safety of that moment. Do you see that? That's the difference between knowing about a doctrine, but actually knowing God. And that does not happen unless we Selah, unless we stop and we breathe and we reflect on what's true about in the midst of our trouble, that God is our present help and our fortress. Number 3, this is really embedded in point number 2, but acknowledge that he is God and that you are not. This is the essence of humility, to know that we have such an impulse in us to basically be God and to try to control our lives. Pastors are maybe the worst in the world about this. It's like to be everywhere, to have all the answers, to be perfect, to be in control. I mean, these are the kind of things that we all feel. We feel an impulse to be. And one of the first steps of how you become a Christian is an acknowledgement of you are not God. You don't have all the answers. You are insufficient. You are incomplete. In fact, you're a sinner. And that he's the one that can save. He is powerful. He is in control. He can be trusted. And those two things right there are exactly where it is that we go. Like, it's the first step in becoming a Christian, but I would say it's the same step that we do. Like, in a moment when you take communion as a Christian, part of what you're saying whenever you come acknowledge the death and resurrection of Jesus is that you're a sinner. And you don't got this, and you need him. In fact, you needed him when you became a Christian, and you need him today just to breathe, to survive, and not end up in the ocean as the earth gives way. We work so hard to self-justify, but we can acknowledge that we are not God. Finally, fourth point, God will be exalted among all peoples, among all nations. You can be still. This actually really helps me a lot, is sometimes I'm like, man, there's so much need, like in our own city, and so much brokenness within our own church, so much need in our region. So, and that's not even starting to the ends of the earth where so many don't even know who Jesus is. And we already talked about the conflict that exists all around the world. But part of what we can be still and know that he is God is he's going to be that for us. But we can even trust him with seeking and saving the lost in our community, planting churches domestically, what we're trying to do out south on our campus, sending missionaries, our friends and neighbors that we love and know where there's brokenness. And we can be still and know that he is going to accomplish this among all peoples, that we can just know that he is sovereign, that's one of the things that we can rest in. And I would even add this, that one of the ways that God propels us out to go love our neighbors and to go plant churches and to go serve as goers and to give generously of our finances and every aspect of this that we're all called into is that as we rest in the Lord and be still and know that he is God, and we sense his love and his care and the fullness of the cross and the resurrection and that he's going to come again someday, it actually propels us out the second part of the verse, that God will be exalted among all the peoples, among all nations. So we conclude with the same verse we've heard multiple times so far. In the midst of trouble, verse 11, the Lord of hosts is with us. The God of Jacob is our fortress. And then we have Selah, right? So here's the thing. I think if we believe all of this is true today, we can tackle anything. If he is with us, that if he is riding with us, that we can tackle any kind of trouble and pain that you're going through. I don't care what that is. No matter the diagnosis, no matter what you're afraid of, even being on death's door, loss, relational conflict, he's got you. I'm going to give you a second to consider Selah one final time that he is with you. Why don't you make that acknowledgement, and then we're going to respond. Okay, Lord, here we are with our trouble, things that overwhelm us. We just admit we are easily distracted, easily tipped over, easily self-sufficient. All of those things are true. But God, we acknowledge we've got no shot if you're not with us, if you're not our fortress, our very present help in the middle of our difficulties. So Lord, would you be that for us today with whatever people are going through, that you would remind us of what's true. And I pray this in Jesus' name, amen.